Welcome to A Sex Worker's Guide to the Galaxy, where the answer to life, the universe, and everything is sex workers. I'm your host, Parker Westwood, and I am so happy to be back. It's been a while since I've posted. I originally thought I was going to be taking about a month off, and I ended up taking about 2.5 months off from posting, and I just want to say thank you to all of you for giving me the space to do that. I needed it. I do this thing where I just underestimate what sort of time I'm gonna need to do things, and here I am. So I needed a little bit more time to settle into my new home and get oriented than I thought I was going to. But I think this interview was worth the wait. Today, I am bringing you an interview with the one and only Carol Leigh, or Scarlot Harlot, who has been a hero of mine in the fight for sex workers' rights and in the creative process and all of that. She's spent decades of her life in the fight for sex workers' rights and has just made moves. She's most known for coining the term sex work, and we get to hear a little bit about that in the interview. We also talk about the sociolinguistics in the feminist movement, anti-trafficking rhetoric, and the framework in which we have to fight for sex workers' rights currently, and all sorts of other things. Her storytelling abilities are out of this world. I had such a wonderful time. The questions that I drafted for this interview were a total moot point. We didn't go anywhere near them, and I loved it. It was so much more fun than what I had envisioned. So there, or as my mother would say, sew buttons on your underwear. But before we get to the interview, I just want to say thank you for listening. And if you'd like to further support the show, you can find us at Patreon at patreon.com/sexygalaxypod. 50% of the Patreon proceeds goes towards the work of a network of sex workers to excite revolution, or Answer Detroit. Answer Detroit is a collective of sex workers working towards the decriminalization and destigmatization of sex workers everywhere through harm reduction and mutual aid, and you can check them out at answerdetroit.org. And if you're unable to financially support the show right now, or you just don't want to, that's totally cool. I'm glad you're here, glad you're listening. Feel free to tell your friends about it, that always helps. And if you feel so inclined, a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts is super helpful to get this podcast to other people. The algorithm likes it, and the algorithm rules all. You can also follow us on Twitter at SexyGalaxyPod, and I post podcasty things on my Instagram at parker.westwood. And I believe that's all of that stuff we have to cover, so let's get on into the interview. Let's go. All right, listeners, I'm really excited today because I'm coming to you with someone who I have really looked up to in the sex workers' rights movement, and we're just going to introduce you to somebody who I'm really excited to talk to. So, Carol Leigh, also known as Scarlot Harlot, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much, Parker. I'm so glad to be here too, and I'm so glad to meet you. So, I mean, I've seen your the notes about your podcast, and it always seemed amazing. And it just thank you for inviting me.
I'm so happy to have you. The way we generally start the podcast is having the guest introduce themselves with a name, pronouns, where you're located, and what kind of sex work you do or have done.
What kind of sex work I do or have done? And okay, name Carol Leigh. Pronouns she, they. Located Lonelyland, San Francisco. And what was the other question?
What kind of sex work you do or have done?
Work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's see. So mostly I've done full service, kind of escort, prostitution, in-call, Worked in massage parlors, a little bit of porn, worked in a fetish business for a while. Haven't done webcam. It was a bit after my career was thrusting.
Yes.
And something else might come up, but that's all I remember now.
Amazing. I'm multi-talented woman.
I only did dancing stripping once at the Golden Banana in Peabody, Massachusetts. It was only one time, but it was memorable for me. So.
I bet you were wonderful. And how did you get started in sex work?
Well, I feel like I trace it back to my uh, my youth, not in that I was doing sex work, but I was curious about sex work. My family talked about my older relatives sometimes seeing prostitutes, and they talked about it in a very exotic way, and it made me wonder what it was about. Um, there were a lot of factors, and some factors were very negative. I remember when my mother was angry at my father, she would say that he treated her like a prostitute. So actually, the kind of symbology around whore and prostitute was always a part of my life. It was always present. It wasn't something that wasn't discussed one way or the other, either sometimes romanticized. My father had a porn collection hidden away, but I found it. And there was,
Yes.
and of course, I looked at the women there, and I wanted to look like that when I grew up. So, what is that thing about nobody ever wants to be a sex worker when they grow up?
Right?
What is that? I don't get that.
And neither do I. I certainly did when I
I
was young.
mean, it's just weird because it's so blatantly not true. Not like I wanted to pose in those magazines and with my breasts and
Yes.
look all happy under a Christmas tree. It was Christmas Carol. I remember her, and that was one goal. So those factors influenced me. As a feminist, I, in some ways, went in the other direction, but I was always very political. I was a red diaper baby, and I know a lot of red diaper babies who then went on to do sex work. Actually,
Yes.
kind of the next. Yeah, you know about this too.
A bit, if it's what I think you're talking about, but like, yeah, the
Well, yeah, people. The parents were socialists. I mean, my
yes.
parents were socialists in
Hmm.
the 30s, and I know quite a few. So you're saying you run into people like that too?
I think if you like, my parents were very socialist minded, very like they would call themselves hippies for sure. Um, and I think with that sort of a mindset, I was raised in an environment where I didn't judge as much, and I really was raised to question assumed judgments and society's take on things.
Interesting. Well, I hadn't even thought of these recent generations because I think when I'd interviewed many of my friends about being a red diaper baby turning into a socialist, it was about their parents' rebellion and continuing that. Um,
Absolutely.
I think that when my parents were getting older, it was during the period when some of their friends were veering towards supporting Stalin.
Mm,
So they taught me very fiercely to always question every possible thing.
yes.
And I think so they never wanted me to accept the right or the left. I mean, I was really raised on kind of a critique of capitalism and a critique of communism or socialism and just a critique of everything. So I mean, I know a lot of other people like me. It's interesting, but and I guess a lot of the parents we know were leftists and hippies. And I mean, of course,
Absolutely.
I was a leftist and hippie. I just didn't have any kids.
You've
Um,
influenced a lot of people, I can tell you that much.
oh right, I'm the whore mother to so many, and I like that.
Yes,
That's a way of being a mother for me. It means a
for
lot
sure.
to me. Yeah.
Would you mind telling us about your experience taking your first client, like when you first kind of walked into the world of sex work?
Sure. Well, let I need to go back a little because this is a long story.
For sure.
So, as a feminist, I learned that it's problematic to capitulate to men's desires when they only have to give you money. They don't really have to be nice to you.
Right.
That made sense. And I also, my own realization was walking around in a world where women are naked and men are clothed. There was some disadvantage implied. I mean, I
Right.
did, I would have had to be pretty defensive to not admit that there was something going on there that I needed to examine. Then, Gloria Steinem went to work at Playboy and decided to write an expose. So I figured as a feminist, it would make sense for me to explore. Then I was also having some sexual fantasies about prostitution.
Hmm.
Then also my whole lifestyle was all about working as few hours as possible and doing my art. And so
Yes.
what was my art? As a child, I wanted to be like Shirley Temple.
Mm.
I majored in theater in high school. Then I switched to writing and poetry, which I majored in Boston University. I went to study with Anne Sexton.
Oh
And
my
the
gosh.
semester she committed suicide. So,
Yes, that's right.
um, so meanwhile, my quest was to not work 40 hours a week. I sold pot. I just was living underground. I was a hippie. I did it for a long time and trying not to do prostitution because I was a feminist and I wasn't so sure, but Gloria Steinem did it, so maybe it's okay.
Right.
Okay. So I dabbled. I did try dancing on amateur night at the Golden Banana in Peabody, Massachusetts, and I actually had sex with two men in the parking lot.
Oh my gosh.
I know. Can you believe it?
Were you paid for that?
Very little. I think I only got $30. I had no idea you could really make money from this. Oh, I forgot. I did do something when I was young. I do think I was over 18 though. I don't
Mhm.
quite recall, but so I went to run away from home, sort of. I didn't tell my parents I was running away. I told them I was staying with a friend. Anyway, to the East Village to stay with more hippies. And
Yes.
then I went to the newspaper, the Village Voice, and I did try out for a play. And I was in a play where all the actors were like on stage being naked and flopping around. I don't get this play. It was kind of like an artsy thing, but it was so dumb. And I was in the chorus. It was like the dumbest thing ever, but fun. It was like on East 14th Street. That was sex work. And then I also went to work at a nude modeling studio.
Yes.
And I did not really get what that was. So I must have been, I bet I was 18. Um,
Hmm.
so I just didn't quite get it. I didn't understand it was prostitution. It seemed scary enough or just odd enough that you would have sex with a stranger.
Yeah.
So this was this was before feminism. So this was in the late 60s. Feminism, I became a feminist in 73. So I wasn't too aware of too many things, but an old man, so he must have been over 40, right?
Yeah.
Way old. Oh, ooh, ooh. I'm sorry to be ageist, but when I was, old teenager,
Oh
old,
yeah.
old men seemed so gross to me. I'm sorry, but it was just like that.
Yeah. I mean, we're
Anyway,
we're socialized to think that way, for sure.
yeah, of course. I don't know if he was my first client, but anyway, so it turned out he wanted to jack off and look at me when I took my clothes off
Oh my goodness.
for $5. Ew,
Wow.
how can I do that? Ew, I'm really compromising myself. Ew. But I did
Mhm.
because I had to try everything. I was very adventurous. Come on, but $5 was nothing. I knew it was nothing, and it was nothing then. It's nothing. I
Right.
just did it because I just wanted to see what it was like. So it was gross. I didn't go back
Right.
when I realized, because you know what? Well, I shouldn't say that. Nobody ever told me you could make a lot of money at prostitution. Not
Yes.
saying that this is true for everyone. I'm not saying that this is also I can make more money with my privileges. I might
Right.
always remembering, but but really I didn't know you can make actual money.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky that I didn't start earlier. I understand different people have different lives, and I don't want to insult people's experience, but I'm glad that I was quite developed emotionally and intellectually, and I didn't really start until I was about 27.
Yep.
So even though I dabbled and I tried to be a stripper a few times, they thought I was too fat. You know what? I was not fat at all.
Fuck that. Yeah, that's
Well,
I got turned away from a club once because I used to be a stripper as well, and
uh,
got turned away from a club because I wasn't attractive enough and they thought I was overweight, and I certainly was not. Yeah. Yeah.
it's like I can't believe they didn't want to hire me. I was so cute. Uh,
Yes.
so, I mean, I understand everybody has different lives, works out different for everybody, but for me, I am very glad that I was developed and could handle, just the challenges of a lot of the stigma
Oh, absolutely.
of being a sex worker.
And early to mid 20s is for I started late as well. I didn't get started in full service sex work till 28. And
Oh,
well,
okay. So,
that's not true till I was 30.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I would not have had the boundaries and self-worth that I do now if I had started in my 20s. So I relate to you on that for sure.
Well, that's interesting to me too, because I've always had kind of yucky boundaries. I mean, you know what? I'm not a sort of person. I'm very good. I was good at speaking truth to power when I was a young person.
Yeah.
But my problem when I did sex work was that when they wanted to stay longer, it was just hard for me to get rid of them. It was just hard for, they just,
Yes.
and then all they want to do is talk. So they want to talk for an hour about their family.
Yeah.
And it was just hard for me to, and they were just like trying to steal my time, I think. I mean, I feel like they were gaslighting me. They didn't use that term in those days, but it was crazy. And I found that so stressful that,
Yes.
and there was these like gentleman types, and they would just sit there talking about the most boring things.
Yeah.
And I wound up doing an hour and a half usually. And I always felt that I had to compromise because I was always afraid that I'd get arrested if I
Hmm.
was having to go out and find more clients all the time. So I always felt like I was sort of forced to be more compromised. And I was having boundaries was not easy, but I worked
Hmm.
around it very brilliantly. I always, I knew how much I could handle. I tried to work as little as possible,
Right.
that sort of thing. I just figured out how to keep as sane as possible given my flaws. So I've always been like that.
Yeah.
They always bother you about you don't have your self-esteem is bad. I don't know, everybody
But
does it.
whose is? I hate when they target that at
I
sex
do. I hate
workers.
that too.
Yes, it drives me wild.
I know. Well, whatever with my self-esteem, I really, really did learn to work with all my flaws and a system in which my flaws could become strengths. And that's part of the artist I am and part of the art I've created. So a lot of the rules that you hear in society about how your personality is supposed to be constructed so you're not like a bad slut, I guess. I realized those rules didn't necessarily have to be the rules, that I could find my own life and be proud of
Exactly.
who I am.
Exactly.
And so the first client, it's still not going to be the first client. So the first client, then finally I got into sex work because I moved to a strange city. I didn't really have too many friends. Remember the last job I had, I was a waitress. The boss came on to me and I thought, this is just like, why shouldn't I be a prostitute? For the first time, having moved to San Francisco and all the signs, sex massage girls, and
Yes.
Gloria Steinem did it. And Hemingway went off to war, and this is a terrain of combat and sexual politics, and I should just try it, and then I'll write about it. I'm doing it.
Yes.
I didn't know anybody who did it. I went down to a massage parlor, and I knew it was a place for sex because, they weren't selling ambiance. It
Mm-hmm.
was just sleazy, and I went in and I knew that you weren't supposed to kind of talk about things. I understood that, again, I was in my late 20s. Yeah, I knew I would implicate them, so I had to be careful. And I don't remember what I said, or I dressed just like a nice, cute woman, nothing special, nothing sexy, just regular. And they sent me in with a regular,
Hmm.
and he was lovely. Now he was 35, but by that time, I don't know why I remember that, but he was 35, and by that time, he was not old to me. I mean, actually, I preferred younger men, a little younger, but he wasn't old to me. He had curly hair, he smelled nice, he was clean, everything nice about him, very cheerful. He said he wanted French, and
Mm.
I guessed what it was.
Did you
I
guess
was
right?
right. I guessed right. Blowjob.
Yes.
It was a blowjob. And I guessed right, and I got $35. Whoa, I'm coming up. Because I said my last one was 30, so I'm making a little more. I had no
Yes.
idea how much to ask for. I still didn't get that there was real money involved in this.
Yeah.
'Cause nobody even in the dressing room talked to me yet. It was a very diverse environment, a massage parlor that was women from all over the world, Korea, Vietnam, Mexico, and I felt so fortunate to be there amongst those women. Of course, I was fascinated with how they dealt with the stigma and the circumstance of their lives and prostitution. And I mean, I knew that first day this was going to be the center of my life, and I understood. I mean, I skipped all the the stories about developing my art and how that was central to my life and trying to find meaning in my life. But anyway, I knew that this was everything I was looking for in terms of exploration about life. And
Hmm.
I remember going home on the BART underground kind of bus, or yeah, like a subway, and those mirrors on the bus, they're dark and you could just see your face. I remember looking in that mirror, and this window in the BART, and I was thinking, wow, now that's a prostitute. And
Yes.
I realized, right, like I was the same person, and
Yes.
that there's nothing changed. Okay, now I'm a prostitute, and there is no line dividing other women from prostitutes. The line disappeared, and that was the
Yes.
revelation.
Absolutely, because we're taught otherwise. We're taught that we become demons or all like villains, like just so many things once we cross that line. And you're right, it just evaporates once we step over it.
And as a feminist, this was such a revelation as a feminist, because I'd learned so much as a feminist that being a prostitute was evil, and
Right.
just to have that revealed was, I mean, I learned the ways that feminism could be untrue.
Yes.
And that was an essential part of my life, because feminism was really, my prior revelation. And that was, really at the center of my life, along with my art. I was completely immersed in feminist theory. But
Yes.
never really went along with, no, I mean, it didn't go along with everything, put it that way. I was always questioning,
Yeah.
and buying into most of it too.
I mean, yeah, you have to buy in sometimes to expose the
Yeah,
fault lines. And I think I had the
yeah.
same experience with feminism was where I realized where feminism can fall prey to patriarchal thought. And when you exclude sex workers and you exclude trans folks from your feminism, like that's a problem. That's not really feminism anymore. So
Oh gosh, feminism. Well, I don't know. Now so do we identify as feminists is a good question. Tell me how about your feminism. How do you deal with feminism, and do you identify as a feminist?
I do identify as a feminist. I think it's really important to claim that. I think I hold out hope. I'm kind of an eternal optimist, but I hold out hope that that all feminists will kind of come to some sort of agreement that like maybe there can be enough discussion that like sex workers' rights can be part of the feminist platform, that trans rights can be part of the overarching feminist platform. I do hold out hope for that because I've seen people's minds change around those things. And I'm just hopeful. And I think there's no reason to give up the word feminism just because there are some people who identify as feminists who don't hold the same beliefs.
One of my favorite subjects. But I
Yeah.
had a lot of thoughts on it, and sometimes my ideas contradict themselves. So I'm not against having feelings in both directions, contradictory ideas. I hold contradictory ideas, so
We
that's how I.
contain multitudes. Absolutely.
I don't know how people manage to figure things out without saying, well, one thing is true and the opposite could be true too. Oh my god. Oh my
What
god.
a radical idea.
I know, it seems like, how could I get by life if I didn't think that? So here's with my feminism. I do really deeply question having the issue of gender be at the center. I do define it that there is a center that has to do with gender, and that also an attachment to the rise of yin or femaleness. Or so I do start there. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I don't know. That's where are you on that?
I mean, as far as like where does the feminist like origin begin?
Well, do you what is feminism? I mean, is it centering the female? Is equality?
Mm,
I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
when I define feminism, I really do define it as okay, I'll just say what I think, and you think more, and then we'll go back.
Yes, please.
Okay, okay,
Yes.
okay, good. Wait, because I have more to say. I wanted to say. Okay, I want to say that I'm an essentialist, and I am a cultural feminist. So part of my identification as a feminist has to do with the people I knew when I discovered the various kinds of thought systems that went along with feminism and the culture that I was from, about for the first time learning to love women,
Yes.
learning to be proud that I'm a woman. So to me, that's the feminism that I love. Now, that cultural feminism, I think, also is related to my privilege. I do think that I have like a cis white, I don't even need to say it, cis white feminism, you know.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, just this, while I'm envisioning that culture that I love so much, I'm thinking of the Michigan Women's Festival, and I'm thinking how the center of what I was doing was about, or in that center were people fighting about excluding trans people, and how our communities were
Right.
excluding trans women, and most of the people I knew weren't really doing much about it and weren't sure what to do.
Yeah.
So here's my culture. So I'm saying anyway, so there's opposite opinions. I embrace some of those stories and embrace some of those moments that not
Yeah.
I mean, not the moments of discrimination, but I just embrace parts I choose. And then there is part of me. So I was exposed by the goddess by a anti-porn activist, Macho Woman Gold. And I used to run a
Whoa.
women's, I know, right? She's still around, but she does environmental work.
Good
Or
for her.
I'm not really, I haven't communicated with them, and I don't recall, but I've seen their work on the web, but they do environmental work, and they just said there was too much angst in it. But although I think she is her pronoun now, Marcia still believes in
Hmm.
anti-porn ideology, but she doesn't want to fight about it anymore. So she
Yeah.
taught me then, and in my group there was a woman who was a stripper, my first exposure, Hinda Paquette,
Oh.
who is also a writer and has a website, a brilliant woman. And she and Marcia were having like this kind of love affair, and they were fighting. And the hypocrisies that I saw from Marcia about her kind of desire for that woman and her kind of condemnation, I found that hypocrisy really enlightening. So I see I'm just going on and on about my own questions, but you know what? Now here we are. And feminism, and how can I have it center on gender as as the lens through which I look at justice, when the economic justice, gender is an issue, and especially around gender fluidity is
Yes.
an issue. But feminism for me is not centered on gender fluidity. For me, again, it's about uh, moving towards the feminine principle. My
Mhm.
essentialism says that feminine is good and men are bad and they beat people up. Do people extract little pieces of my interview and say that? And look how bad Scarlot Harlot is. She's such an essentialist. And look, do they take these little pieces where they do, don't they?
They
What?
probably,
Tell
that's
me
often
everything.
what
Tell
happens.
me.
I think too, like, we only beat men when they want it, you know? But I do think that with feminism, at least for me, the way that I tend to look at feminism is that it's the antithesis of the patriarchy. It is centering femme identity, maybe not even identity, but like femme qualities, which is like acceptance, compassion, inclusivity, intersectionality. Like it it's no longer centered around this like rigid idea of gender, but these like concepts that have been left behind in patriarchy. um so for me, feminism isn't so much centered around gender as much, but like these concepts that are associated with the feminine. um
I get that with my attachment to the ascendance of the female principle. That's what
yes,
we're saying, the same thing there, right?
exactly. I did want to ask you because um I really want to hear about the genesis of the term sex work, because you're credited with the coining the term sex work,
Oh, yes.
and I would love to hear where that came about and how you coined the term sex work.
Right. I like that whole thing, but I really love deconstructing the terminology around sex work. Like I had one more thing I have to add.
Yes, please.
It can't be excluded about feminism.
Yes.
Women of color, all my friends forget feminism and what it's done to them. There's a very, it's the majority. I mean, might identify as womanist, might, whenever talk about feminism, might also make sure to critique the way feminism has been discriminatory towards women of color. That is such a huge factor in my life. That's half of how I deal with feminism as part of this community with this lived experience.
Yes.
So for me, if I'm going to call myself a feminist, I can only do it by qualifying it with that fact
Yes.
and by qualifying it with everything else I qualified it with before.
Yeah.
And the only thing I support it with is my, you know, sounds a little privileged, is just my wanting to embrace some personal nostalgia, but it's justifying it in that, well, if I do it privately, well, if I explain, maybe there's room to deal with it. Okay,
Right.
room to process it. So I said it. Okay. Okay, so here we are on sex work. So, how I coined the term sex work? Is
Yes,
that where we
please.
want to start? Okay.
Yes, please.
That's the story you're supposed to tell all the time. Okay, good.
Yeah.
But my favorite is to deconstruct the terminology around sex work, because I mean, sex workers are starting to do that more and more, and that's kind of new. So I find that so exciting. But sex work, well, it was in late 70s, early 80s, and I'm not 100% exactly which year. I know the event was a conference. So I've been a sex worker a prostitute activist. I had never used the term. Been a prostitute activist. As soon as I became a prostitute, I went out and I started writing poetry about it. I had a theater show. I mean, I developed an act. I was in San Francisco. I was a performance poet.
Yes.
So I was going to a conference as part of Coyote. We used to go to the anti-porn conferences and sort of make a stand as people who are actually in the business, wanting to give a first-person perspective by
Absolutely.
individuals involved. So
Yeah.
um, So I went to one, and I do remember that I think it was at Mills College. I keep trying to find it, but I remember being outside and picketing in a circle. I think I remember Priscilla Alexander being there. I remember attending workshops, and now I remember this one workshop I went to. I remember walking up the stairs in this building, and at the top there was a newsprint pad. And I remember the name of this workshop. I don't remember if it was a manual or anything, but I looked online, but it was something about the sex use industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds bad,
It
right?
sounds terrible. Yeah.
Right. But I wasn't like even thinking about that whole thing, use. I was thinking that, we are feminists.
Mm-hmm.
So why are we identifying the situation by what the men do? The men use the services, right? No.
Yes.
We should be identifying by what the women do. And what do the women do? They work.
I love it.
Sex work industry. I remember I crossed it off and just put the word work there. Went into the workshop.
On the official workshop sign, you crossed it off and just wrote it in?
This is in my memory, and this is, this is what my memory says.
Yeah, let's go with it. I'm here for it.
Let's go with it. Let's go with it. I think I might have actually crossed it out. But anyway, when I got to the workshop, I began to talk about it, but nobody thought anything. I remember we were sitting in a circle, and there wasn't any reaction. Anyway, most of the people there, they don't know anything about porn, anti-porn. They were just there, feminists trying to learn things. They weren't on any side. There was a few rabid people who might have, but they never thought about it before. So there was no issue, nothing. Yeah. So, it just stayed there, and that was fine. And when I left, and so no discussion. I don't remember the discussion that ensued. It wasn't because I think, of course, the people who were presenting the workshop were the anti-porn people, and I don't recall what we all discussed in that workshop. But I knew when I left that this was a good word, sex work.
Yes.
And it's very interesting to me that nobody objected. Now, I didn't really understand at that point that it was going to be kind of the center of our movement, but I did realize that I figured something out, and especially when I went home to write my poetry.
Yes.
And write my play. I was primarily writing a play comprised of poetry. Edna St. Vincent Millay had a one-woman performance piece or play. There were some poets who wrote in that format. And this was what I was doing. I wrote little poems, and then I weaved them together with a script. And my Adventures of Scarlot Harlot was about a prostitute, exactly me.
Yes.
Who was going to come out and change the place of prostitution in the world. And so the first thing she does, she goes on stage, and she has a paper bag on her head. And it says, this paper bag symbolizes the anonymity prostitutes are forced to adopt. And she can't see, and she's clumping along. I wore tap shoes. So she clomps up the stairs, and she can't see anything. Clump, clump, clump. And she has the paper bag on her head. And as she takes it off, she goes, sex workers unite.
Yes.
We won't remain anonymous.
Oh.
And then she has a manifesto. And this I got from the Dadaists, because it just says whore, whore, whore in big words. Right, it's just, but she's reading off it. There are laws in this country. Oh my God, see, I don't remember what it said, but it said all those things that prevent me from blah, blah, blah,
Yes,
Bad, bad, bad. And so there I came out as a sex worker. And then I'd say, oh, wowie, I'm going to announce it to the whole world. So then I would call people and get their advice. I called Priscilla Alexander, a great activist in Coyote, and she was kind of sex negative and uptight. So she gave me a funny view. Her funny view was like, oh, she was like blasé about the term sex worker. But what she told me about the insidious relationship between the sexes and the feminization of women, she told me that lipsticks are insidious, and that lipsticks, when she looks at them, she knows what they symbolize. They symbolize doggy cocks.
Oh my goodness.
And Scarlett's like, thank
Wow.
you, Priscilla. Thank you for enlightening me. She goes and she'll just call one person after the next, and she comes out to her mother, and then I come on stage and okay, so that's the story. So that's how the term sex work was born.
Love
And
it.
it,
It's
it was good.
fantastic.
The play was really did say it and established it and made the whole argument for it. And it was really Priscilla Alexander and I who created the prevalence of the use of that term.
Yes.
I was part of the book that she published, Sex Work. I had several chapters in there, many. It's kind of my chapters that I've been writing were interwoven through the book. And philosophy I developed with Kate Marquez, a girlfriend of mine who's now recently writing a book about herself and me and sex work, and how prostitution saved my life.
Oh,
So
cool.
all these people around me, I developed this philosophies with everyone around me, Margot St. James and Coyote
Yes.
and Priscilla. By 1987, I think that book was published. So this was, there's a documented article about it in 83, but I know it was before that because I'd already been producing the play. So it was a couple of years before that, basically.
Absolutely.
That's the whole sex work story.
I love it. I think it's so important. I love that everyone was just kind of like, yeah, call it whatever you want. But like the importance of that term, identifying that we are workers, is so key to identifying the sex workers' rights movement as a labor movement, as like a workers' rights movement.
Right.
And I would love, one of the things you said you wanted to talk about was like the sociolinguistics in the sex worker movement. And I would love to hear your thoughts on some of the other words that we use, and how, yeah, just like open that brain of
One.
yours. Tell me about it.
Don't we need more sociolinguists in our movement? Don't you think we don't
Yes.
have enough? I mean, I noticed that. Why aren't people discussing? Well, Robin Lakoff, Language in a Woman's Place, was what influenced me. So, early feminism.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we created the term Ms. and chairwoman, not chairperson. And
Yes.
I mean, the way that feminism impacted language was profound and empowering. And I say, as a cis white woman who saw, I just to say, I loved feminism because it empowered me. It gave me power. And I see that a lot of that way of loving this politics came from my privileges. And that's something I learned about. Some people never let go of that in their feminism. Some people didn't wake up and realize, oh, this movement, these realizations gave you so much because the position you have in society, the ways you could network, and the revelations empowered me.
Yes.
Not everybody.
No, not everybody.
One thing interested me is that there was one question, and I think
Yes.
this was I think this was when I was looking at all that brilliant work by Hacking Hustling.
Oh, yes.
Right, and they had amongst on their panel, and it may have even been an actual panel about this. It was about sex work and anti-sex work, and there were some people suggesting that the term sex work implies that work is good and implies that work is good. That there's an implication that work, like, you're supposed to work and have a job and be a good supportive person in society, and that the term sex work has that implication.
I'm making a face right now, listeners, because I don't buy it. I think that is that's not a problem they have with the term sex work. That's a problem they have with the term work, right? And the thing is, like, it is work, and we live in a capitalist society, and so to identify it for what it is makes it so that we can fight for the rights of the workers. I'm not arguing that work is good or bad at this point. I would definitely say that capitalism has its flaws. But I think, yeah, they definitely don't have a, well, if they have a problem with the term sex work, it's something other than what they identified.
Wow. Well, you must have thought about this, or are you just saying that because it's so much part
That's
of you that
that's
you
coming off the
just,
top of my head. I'm coming to the defense
whoa,
of sex work.
oh, everything you said is what the other people will say when when I ask them what they think. Isn't that funny? Interesting. Well, one academic suggested that there is some. Oh, I'm totally a leftist, of course. Now, I mean, I'm
Yes,
not a libertarian, although in the United States there's a very huge libertarian contingent.
that's true.
And but I am a leftist, but and not anti-communist, of course, because my family would be put in jail,
Yeah.
or they were deprived jobs. They weren't really. My family wasn't put in jail. People I know were hounded. And anyway, so I'm not anti-communist, but that some of the leftist discourse and the older leftist discourse around prostitution and sex work has not really been digested as well as it could be, and that's impacting some of that current discourse on sex work.
Absolutely.
So,
There's a lot of perspective shifting we still have to do for different groups of people. Honestly, I think that different groups of people have different qualms with sex work. Um, so it's going to take a lot of conversations with different groups of people to kind of what is the phrase I'm looking for? But to be on the same page about like what sex work actually is.
I'm fascinated in this, and I have to say I don't. It's one of these things I don't at all understand yet. An academic explained to me that there is a lot, also some very sophisticated kind of sophisticated students of Marxism that are developing these theories, that if you don't have the exposure to this, that it's hard to understand. That there
Yes.
is some. That's what she said. That I'm missing. I'm not going to get this until I study it up a bit more.
Yeah. I'm probably in that boat with you as well. There's definitely some more Marxist theory I could digest and learn a few things from. But in the meantime, I still think sex workers' rights is worth fighting for. So
Now, Thought Scholar, do you know their work?
oh my God,
They're
I'm
the
in
only people.
love. Yes.
Well, they're one of the only. I mean, I don't think they every day say, "Oh, I'm a philosopher," but isn't that Thought Scholar seems so much like a philosopher to me. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
know.
well certainly a poet. Certainly a poet, and I think that once you start to like have that love of language, and you're a poet so you can attest to this.
They're
Once you
amazing.
have that love of language, you can't not fall in love with philosophy. The way that words influence society and people, um, it's really hard to not get into philosophy if you love words.
And the term sex work, I know from these years of people in the movement objecting to it in various ways.
Hmm.
So I know from that, some people would object because not because they don't casually use the word,
Right.
because it's not, unless you're an activist you might, but even if you're an activist you won't be going, oh, I'm going to go home and do some sex work. You might say, I'm going to go work. You will say that. In fact, that's what we said when I was coining the term sex work, and that's why I knew that
Yeah.
everybody around me like totally regards this as work,
Yes, I got to put
right?
on my uniform. Yeah.
I mean, it was always bizarre to me that it was such a surprise that it was work. The other people think it's either an expression of our sluttiness or it's some kind of rape. That is,
Mm.
so the people experience it as work,
Hmm.
and then the people against it. But I don't want to be dualistic. But
No, but that's
no.
that ties right back into what you were saying earlier, that like we are complex and the issue is complex and we contain contradictory things, right? So like it's really hard to talk about sex work because like as a sex worker, I find like I want people to believe that it's work. So I want to talk about like the good parts, but I don't want to completely invalidate the experiences that I've had and that my friends have had and that other people have had where it's like not great.
But wait, work is bad. Wait. Isn't work like, oh, I have to go to work? I mean, no, there's good work, and then there's work you like that you want to do, and then there's work, so much work. Like, I don't want to go work at the restaurant tonight unless it's like I have a rare feeling I'm going to see somebody, right? That's like
Exactly.
really yucky.
But it's
But
like
no,
any other job in that way, except that we're not protected.
you don't mind talking about that, or do you even want to sometimes veer away from talking about it as a yucky job? I don't know. Some of us don't experience that as a yucky job. I'm not sure
Right.
I experienced it as a yucky. I don't think I ever experienced it as a yucky job. I had
Yeah.
other.
I think it's just um I want to talk about it in its multitudes, right? But like when I'm talking to people who are very anti-sex work, I find myself wanting to talk about it in all of its good forms and not talking about it in the other multitude of ways that it can be experienced. And I think that happens a lot. There are a lot of sex workers I see that are just like it's empowering and like all these things, and it can be that. I experience it that way, but I've also experienced it where like I've had a client who crossed some boundaries and I felt like I really needed the money and I felt really beholden to that moment and like I didn't want to be there. um and luckily I've not had like a violent client. I'm very very grateful for that, but it's one of those things where like I think it's important that we talk about it on the whole and like the way that many people experience it rather than like what society wants us to do, which is like pigeonhole it into different things, right? Like we're either like we make thousands of dollars and we like glorify it and it's like neon lights and all this stuff, champagne bottles all the time, or villain like criminalize like on the way that people assume like street workers work. um you know what I mean? I think it's
Yeah, I know, and it's also not recognizing that continuum is so discriminatory and
mm-hmm,
really leaves out the most vulnerable members of our communities. So it's such a horrible thing
yes.
to be forced into that situation where where you're not admitting anything bad. It's so discriminatory. There's so much cruelty in that. And I think a lot of times maybe more privileged sex workers are just don't quite understand that kind of conundrum. It's really a hard one to get out of because I don't want to put too much blame on people for being also under the microscope all the time. People saying, "Oh, you hate sex work. You're not admitting it. You're deceitful." And then you're just having to kind of just say, "Oh no, it's really great. I make money," and then leave out the millions of people who just don't want to do it. It's so hard.
I think people just want it to be cut and dry because it's easier to find a solution when it's either this or that. And it's a complex industry that is going to require like complex solutions so that workers can have rights. Like it's not like a one size fits all sort of thing. Sex work is so many different things. And when people try to lump sex work and trafficking together, that makes it even more of an issue. And I know you had said that you wanted to speak on this, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I do notice. Wait, let me take a break. Can you
Oh,
have
yeah.
a makeup break?
Yeah, makeup break. I should probably drink some water.
Okay, makeup.
This makeup break is the perfect opportunity for me to remind you that this podcast is sponsored by Companion Tax. If you are a sex worker and need help with your taxes, Companion Tax is where I go, and I highly recommend it. So check them out at companiontax.com. Now, I think we've had enough time to powder our noses, so let's get back into the interview.
20 years, I was one of the producers of a small film festival, San Francisco Sex Worker Film and Arts Festival.
Yes.
But and then what I'd worked on then for the next whatever, the main part of my older life was a video series, Collateral Damage, Sex Workers and the Anti-Trafficking Campaigns, and studying about trafficking. So basically, and working with international activists, and mostly, I'm kind of in Laura Augustin's camp
Yeah.
in terms of I really challenge the anti-trafficking framework.
Good.
The difference, I think, I do work inside the trafficking tangentially with some organizations, because I want to see what they're doing. I want to fight to represent prostitutes, even though these contexts are bad.
Yes.
So the anti-trafficking framework, I think, is a booby trap for sex workers.
Yes.
It combines disparate conditions, situations, i.e., like youth who left home, could be living with other youth, or homeless people, or people who work in factories, and all kinds of sex workers. And it combines disparate communities under a framework that molds it into one kind of idea that, well, the idea that we have to keep people out of our country, that's one. That we have to stop immigration, and that immigrants are being tortured through trafficking, and that we can't let them move around. That's part of it. And that sex workers are tortured through sex work, and we can't let them move around. We can't let them be legal, because being a sex worker is equals rape.
Right. So the idea is that we protect these folks by removing all of their rights, which just like it never really made sense to me. The anti-trafficking movement, they tell this like supervillain story of like traffickers and like what a prostitute actually is, or what a sex worker is. And then they create all these laws around it, not taking into account how it actually affects our community, where like it's illegal for like 2 or more sex workers to share an apartment in order to work out of and like work safely, right? Like that's considered a illegal brothel or what have you. And even I think you identified this in your book, Unrepentant Whore, which I love the title. That even our loved ones could be considered as like living off the arrears of a sex worker, which is in these anti-trafficking policies considered an offense. It's illegal.
Well, that was true before. Pimping is just, your family could be a pimp. That was
Totally.
They escalated the charges, and they made it even to a more serious crime, and then they sort of called it trafficking.
Yeah.
So but the thing, and also what I know what concerns me is that there are so many definitions of trafficking. The UN has one, the US has a different one, because in the US, it does say in the TVPA, it does say that all sex work is trafficking. It says that, but then that's not an operational definition, because in US code, it used to be in US code, within trafficking codes, I guess they don't penalize commercial sex itself. They only penalize it when it's accompanied by other kinds of force. I don't know how to say this quite well, but I do know that I do know that there are so many definitions, and that when people talk about trafficking, even to say that trafficking is bad, no matter what they say, it doesn't take into account like what definition of trafficking, who's trafficking, if are those people just talking about commercial sex in general? Are
Right.
they talking about, forced sex work with, uh, that that of course does
Yeah.
include coercion. I mean, that it's absolutely impossible to understand what they're talking about. So I feel that it reifies the kind of the concept of trade trafficking and gives people the idea that it is one thing or one monolith of a structure, and that when in reality there's so many circumstances, and there's so many kinds of abuses and exploitations, and why are they taking the most extreme
Mm-hmm.
that happens, but happens, of course, at a much rarer rate than the a million everyday injustices that we face as workers
Right.
and as migrants. Why are they taking those elements and making that symbolic for oral trafficking, and then making it symbolic for prostitution?
Yeah.
The trafficked person is a symbol of the prostitute for the general public. Well, they try we have anti-trafficking allies, right?
Yeah.
And the anti-trafficking allies really, really believe that we can change what trafficking means, and that trafficking that can refer to all labor, and that we could use trafficking laws uh,
Yes.
to stop these a lot of these abuses. But with the history, I'm not so sure. And one thing I am sure of is that
Mm-hmm.
by instituting that direction and not making people wary of what has happened, what could happen with scapegoating sex workers, they just continued this long thread of abusing sex workers, because the victims, making us into horrible victims, and abusing us. And I think that the trafficking framework is dire. I think that people need to call it out. I don't feel like people are discussing the framework.
Yeah, I mean, and this comes back to like the sociolinguistics of it, right? Where like the definition of trafficking is super important. And I think you're right. They make us into victims so that they can take this real paternalistic view and swoop in and save us with these overly simplistic, oh, like one size fits all laws that actually put more sex workers in danger. They don't solve the problem because the analysis of the problem is completely out of touch.
Yes, it's all there to prevent migrants from moving and prevent people from doing sex work. It's
Yeah.
all historically constructed that way, and I don't think that the planet has done much to change things. I
Yeah.
just thought of this the other day. That really, I like this one. That I feel like trafficking gerrymanders
Ooh.
all our the multitude of abuses that we've experienced into a place where we don't have power.
Yes.
That we have our wage theft, that bosses might be trying to have sex, make us have sex with our friends,
Mm-hmm.
coercion. We have, people do take their passports away when they're trying to get jobs as, in domestic field. I mean, there's a million abuses that are, that do qualify, or that they're not spending money on. I don't want to
Yes.
talk about enforcement of anything, but, um, and the reality of our work is being gerrymandered away from our the source of power for us, and
Yes.
until people stop buying in. Now, I mean, my friends are in anti-trafficking groups.
Yeah.
I mean, my friends look at me. There was something I just let through.
Yeah.
And so in our law, SB 32, 357, that we're trying to get rid of loitering,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
people are saying that they need the loitering charges because we're sex workers. They need the loitering charges to get rid of the trafficking. And just, I
Mm.
have to, of course they're saying that. And I have to say, we have been fighting back using the trafficking and saying, no, it helps traffic victims. No,
Mm.
traffic. And if we don't arrest traffic victims, it's better for them because they then they're not so vulnerable and we don't put them through that.
Exactly.
But the problem is that still reifies the whole trafficking framework. And there was a document, and another activist called it
Mm.
out and just said, we just have to be so careful of not fighting trafficking with the trafficking framework. And I just was like,
It's so hard. It's so hard. And I think one of the things that drives me crazy is pitting the people who are pro sex work and people who are anti-trafficking against each other, because as someone who is pro sex work, I am also anti-trafficking. Like what the definition that they have of trafficking, like I don't want people to be treated the way that people are treated when they're trafficked.
but I don't even like to say that because I would always use other words for trafficking if I was
I think that's smart.
anti-abuse. Here's a good one: anti-abuse, anti-exploitation,
There we
and
go.
I'm against the treatment that is identified as trafficking. It's a teeny little
Love
language
that.
twist, and then you don't have to say you're anti-traffic. You're
Yes.
against things identified as trafficking, things
Yes.
categorized as trafficking. I think that's night and day, but
I
but
think
the
that's so important.
it's
Yes.
really important. But you know what? Uh, the piece was too short, and you couldn't put identified as trafficking in the piece every single time. So I gave up. I didn't even make that itsy bitsy little change because I was fighting trafficking with trafficking.
Ugh,
I
it's
mean,
so hard.
fighting anti-trafficking with the trafficking framework,
Yeah.
as a tool.
Yeah. Oh my God. Language. I am gonna use this moment talking about language to kind of pivot to your more creative sensibilities, because you're an artist, you're a poet, you're a musician, you're an incredibly talented person, and you did run the San Francisco Sex Worker Film and Arts Festival. You founded it.
Yes, but my mother helped me found it. But
Oh.
Erica Fabulous and uh, Lori McElroy, who is my friend who died in 2018.
Oh
So,
wow. Oh,
but we mostly kept it going and local activists too.
I love that. And one of the things that um I've always appreciated about your work is this like theatrical aspect to a lot of your activism, like making it relatable and entertaining, to have people think, but also this emphasis on the importance of self-expression and documentation for marginalized communities. I think you even put that in the list of like things you can do for sex workers' rights in the back of your book, that made me
Oh,
so happy
yes.
to see. And would you mind telling us a little bit about why it's so important to make self-expression and documentation available for marginalized communities?
Oh, I hope I'm not too tired for this one because I
That's
you
fine.
know why? Because I've been doing a lot of work on this lately, and
Yeah.
Kamal Gandhar is an organization in India, and uh, they talk about how central it is for to be able to have our diverse members of our communities work together,
Hmm.
and how essential it is to use creative strategies and strategies with arts and creativity to support our communication, that is kind of the route that we need to incorporate to communicate because of the diversity. And this
Agreed.
is just a document. uh, I mean, that just needs a link. Chrysalides Real, this artist, activist, and this is so important to me as an artist, and that sex work the is a creative form.
Yes.
It can be, I mean, of course, it can also just be like, clearing off the table as a waitress, but it really can be an actual kind of work, like dance it's almost like dance. There is a creativity to this too. There's a lot of different
Absolutely.
ways to take it, but I just think that the relationship between sex work and art is important to understand.
Yes.
Not everyone is going, and I can talk about privilege, and that has a lot of meaning, especially in these colonialist cultures. There's different meanings if you're in a colonial or colonized culture. And I think, what I see coming out of colonized cultures is an art that's very, in sex worker groups, is like an art that's coming directly from the sex workers, that it's communal art.
Yes.
A little bit different than what we see in the United States and maybe in Europe. And that art form, I feel like, has been central to the sex workers movement.
Yeah.
I just don't think I'm up to explaining it all.
Oh, that's fine. I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I also, well, my interpretation of it is that, like, it's a way that we get to tell our own stories and our own history. Like, that is the importance of self-documentation and self-expression, right? And so we don't want to let our oppressors do that for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes.
I have one more question and then some rapid fire. Is there something that you would want the greater public to understand about sex workers or sex work as a whole?
Oh, I saw that and I didn't think about it right away. No, the main thing is that people just need to understand how diverse it is. That's
Yes.
what, I can't think of anything else, because diversity, to some people it's a regular job. Some people it can be something exciting and intriguing in their life's work. And some people it can be something they're forced into. It can represent a kind of rape. It can, and everything in between. So I think that diversity, and they also have to understand a monolith. I have one more of these too. Okay.
Yeah.
A monolith. They have to understand that it has been seen monolithically. Not only do they have to understand how diverse it is, that there's so many different people living so many different types of lives. It's in the fabric of society, but that people have regarded it monolithically, and they just have to be able to embrace, either they deal with people who are in a really abject situation, or they think everybody's like making like, $10,000 a day.
Exactly. Yes.
That's crazy. But the one thing here's another thing I didn't say that I really think more than anything, this isn't really in your category of question here, but okay.
That's fine.
You know what? Our feminists and feminism have to get together and admit what harm women's movements have done to sex workers. We all have to we have to embrace this crime. We have to go forward. That movement needs to go forward with a recognition of the harms and use that as a model for change. So,
yes.
Yes, and I think, I put this online. Somebody said that didn't sound too likely. But I just think that nobody's doing that strategy. I don't see anybody among the feminists just saying, just look at what you have done and then start to take it another way.
Yeah. Well, we live in a culture right now that is so allergic, like deathly allergic to admitting that we're wrong, that for an entire movement to come forward and say we were wrong would be huge. Like, it's important to admit we're wrong, because then we can move forward and do better, right? And I think you're incredibly right. Like, the feminist movement needs to admit that it was wrong.
Yeah, and the movements too. It doesn't mean that where countries understand that they sometimes like disavow their colonial heritage. Sometimes it's a struggle, but there are some models, and it's hard to really. I don't really want to compare it to anything, because that's not really fair. But there's models, and they need to start using that framework.
Agreed. That's how change is going to happen.
Rapid fire.
Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
Oh, do I have a drink? Okay.
Yes, get hydrated. Okay. Pancakes or waffles?
I'm stumped. Waffles.
Excellent. Salty or sweet?
Am I like the worst at this? Oh my God.
I love it. These are hard.
Ah,
These are hard for no reason.
I need both. I won't always take both. I'll take both.
Yeah. Do you have an order? Do you like sweet then salty or salty then sweet? Doesn't matter.
And that doesn't matter.
I love that. Okay. Glitter or sequins?
Well, glitter is medically dangerous, so I have to take sequins.
Excellent. What is your favorite place you've
But
ever
I like
been?
glitter a little better.
I love it. What is your favorite place you've ever been?
Oh, I love that. But I don't know. But, oh my God, what's my favorite place I've ever been? Oh my God.
I know. You've been so many places.
I just because yeah, just a little traveling around the world. I don't know. My favorite place I've ever been. I don't know. Can I not answer that one?
Oh, yeah. You have too many favorites?
Yeah, and some of them are the favorites for different reasons. I don't want to like one that's bad, please.
Ah, I love it.
I like one that I learned the most at, but it's not a place I'd ever call my favorite. And then I could just say Venice because it was beautiful, but I don't want to say that.
Yeah, we can be exempt from this question. That's fine with me.
I'm exempt from that.
We'll plead the fifth. A book from your mandatory reading list.
I don't know. Sex work, I guess.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a good one. A song, an album, or a musical artist you've been obsessed with lately.
Oh.
I love the way your face just lit up.
Song artist. Well, I do have a few. Megan Thee Stallion, Lizzo.
Oh, yes.
Love them. So maybe I'll just go for them.
Yeah, that you can't.
I have one that I have been really obsessed with lately, though. That those are my general obsessed ones. But I think I'm gonna by the end I'll come up with. I do have one more that I'm in love with too.
Yeah, just to yell it out when you got it.
Okay, yeah.
That happens to me all the time. Someone will ask me like, "What are your favorite bands?" And I'll be like, "I've never listened to music in my life. Like all information has just left my brain." What is your secret talent?
Oh yeah, workaholic. I always I know that one because it comes up at those meetings. Huge workaholic. Totally. It's my secret superpower that people have, but that's it.
Oh, that's so funny.
I'm the biggest workaholic.
My next question is if you had one superpower, what would it be?
Oh, okay.
So workaholism?
That's my superpower. And what was the other one then? What the other
The other one was what's your secret talent?
Oh, well, the same thing.
Yeah, I love that. Complete this sentence. Good sex is
something I've had very little of.
Wow. It's a good answer. But also breaks my heart. I wish for you to have good sex always. What is something simple that brings you joy?
Planning a vacation. I just had that happen. That's why I was so happy. And I forgot I went on a vacation because with COVID, you couldn't even leave. And I left and I was like, I don't think I had experienced pleasure so deep in 2 years. And I remembered what pleasure was. So.
I love that. So important. And that brings us to the end of the interview. That's my last question. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. Let's say goodbye to the listeners.
Listeners, goodbye. It was
Bye,
so
listeners.
nice to talk to you and see you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
I just love where that interview ended up going. So big thanks to Carol Leigh for being on the show. Thank you all for listening, as always. I really appreciate it. And be sure to tell your friends. You can find all of Carol Leigh's links, including a link to purchase her book in the show notes, as well as links for everything we talked about, at least as many of the things as I could find links for. And enjoy checking those things out. I try to have a wide variety of things for you all to look at after the show if you so choose in the show notes. So do check those things out. I'm so thrilled to be back in the saddle or on the spaceship or whatever whatever metaphor we're using. But I'm really grateful to have this podcast to return to after the move. I need a little bit of normalcy, and I'm really grateful that y'all are here to listen to whatever I'm putting out and be a part of that for me. So thank you. And now is the time for a space fact. If you're like me, you end up with a bunch of weird bits and bobs in your pocket, like rubber bands, loose change, probably a hair binder or pocket knife, whatever it might be. Keep the stuff in your pocket when you are traveling the galaxy, because you never know what might be of value on another planet. You may not quite understand what sort of bartering chips you have in your pocket that you ascribe very little value to. So keep those things around, because when you're running loose in the galaxy, you need as many tricks up your sleeve as you can get. Nanu nanu, motherfuckers. Yeah.